Hi, my name is Mark and I'm a life coach for men. Today I'd like to talk briefly about narratives and expectations. Almost from the day we're born, we are subjected to a barrage of information from all quarters. When we're very young, this process begins with our parents, and hopefully we have two of them and they're interested enough in us to want us to understand the world, how we fit into that world, and prosper. Quite early on, we're also subject to a barrage of other narratives from a multiplicity of other sources. For example, when we go to school, we will almost certainly be exposed to the narrative that if we work hard at school, then we'll do well in life. A narrative that's hardly surprising given that this keeps teachers in work. As we get older, we're also subject to a bewildering variety of narratives from other sources, the media, politicians, and advertisers, for example. The narratives that we're exposed to can be very visible or very subtle and almost invisible. A visible narrative, for example, would be the idea that politicians have all the answers, because politicians keep telling us precisely that. A more subtle narrative might be one from advertising that suggests that your value as a human being depends on what model of car you drive. Wherever the narratives come from, they can be powerful and they can be pervasive. They are rarely talked about and hardly ever subject to rational examination. It's as though their very ubiquity adds to their credibility. One of the most popular narratives centres around the idea that there's some kind of cosmic justice. Many may incorrectly refer to this as karma, but you'll undoubtedly be familiar with the basic concept. The idea is that if you do bad things, then bad things will happen to you at some point, a form of reckoning, if you will. And so we have such phrases as, what goes around comes around, and they'll get their comeuppance. It's a very popular concept, and it's easy to understand why. That driver that just cut you up at the roundabout, or that girl that just turned you down, well, relax, because one day they'll suffer in some fashion because they deserve it. The idea of cosmic justice is taken a step further in many organised religions, and it's great because it's impossible to refute. After all, how many people come back from the dead to tell us that heaven doesn't exist and that hell isn't there either? Another of these dangerous narratives is that everything happens for a reason. Take a moment to think about that. You could also rephrase it to say, everything makes sense. Well, in that case, I'm really looking forward to someone explaining the sense in the Holocaust that took over 6 million lives, or the communist regimes in the Soviet Union and China that have killed millions of their own people. Anyone care to tell me what the sense was behind these crimes against humanity? No, thought not. So, what other narratives are there out there? Well, given that men are men and women are women, there are plenty of narratives surrounding the subject of love. One such is the phrase that there's someone for everyone, which suggests that however socially inadequate you are, or however annoying, or however ugly, there's your soulmate out there. Well, call me old-fashioned, but when people make grand claims, I like to have what we old people refer to as evidence, and there seems to be precious little of that to support this claim. Case in point is a very good friend of mine, who we'll call Mr. X. Mr. X is in his early 50s. He's intelligent, compassionate, good fun, good-looking, and fit. And he's not found his soulmate yet. I suspect she doesn't exist. Or she might exist, but lives in Outer Mongolia and will never get to meet Mr. X. Either way, this means that Mr. X remains single and unfulfilled. Now, the big problem with narratives is that they do so much to shape how we see the world, how the world works, and how we can navigate through this world. Narratives shape our expectations, and when thinking about our expectations, I always try to keep in mind this simple mantra. Realistic expectations equals serenity. Unrealistic expectations equals world of pain. So, what do we do? Well, I think the first step is to be aware of the narratives that you're being exposed to. Here are a few examples to get you thinking. Christmas. It's a time when we should be together with friends and family. We'll all get together and have a great time. Well, what if you don't have a family, or you left them because they were abusive. Another narrative, and they lived happily ever after, just like in a Disney movie. The guy gets the girl, and that's it. The hard work is done, and now everything is fine. Well, until she divorces him, or there's a fatal car accident, or someone gets dementia. A third example of a narrative, work hard and you'll do well. Well, that might be true if you have an IQ of 130 and are really conscientious. But what happens if you're a hard worker with an IQ of 90? Then I suggest your options are severely limited, and not through any fault of your own, given that IQ seems to be mostly an inherited characteristic from your parents. These are just a few examples, and I'm sure you can think of plenty of others. Once we're aware of the narratives we're exposed to, then my suggestion is that we should examine them. Do they make sense? Are they true? And perhaps more importantly, are they true for me in my situation? If the narrative is correct, then fine. You just carry on doing what you're doing. But if the narrative isn't true, then what? Well, then it's time to think about how you're doing this thing called life. For example, if you've been brought up on the narrative that girls love nice men, you may be in for a surprise when the girl you're lusting after ignores you and goes salivating after the local motorbike riding bad boy. Now, I'm not suggesting they buy a motorbike and start acting like a git, but it might be worth a more detailed examination of what women actually want. And you could read something on gender dynamics or evolutionary psychology. If you want to get the girl, then you need to know what the girl really wants, and not some fluffy bullshit given to you by your mum. So that's it. I'm sure lots of people have written about this subject or done YouTube videos and podcasts. This is just my take on the subject. I hope you found it thought-provoking. If you have any comments, good or bad, I'd love to hear from you. And here's a shameless plug. I work as a life coach, and I work specifically with men, as men face a discrete set of problems and challenges. If you think that I might be able to help you, then please feel free to get in touch. Thank you for listening.